It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Well, folks, welcome in. Excited for Herd Mentality. Some great questions coming out of the draft, about the direction of the team, about the draft picks, all of that. So let's get into it. First one is a fun one. It comes from Chris. Chris says, I was wondering if you were to comp each of our picks to a previous Bills player specifically, who would you choose? Kind of like Ray Davis to Kenneth Davis ceiling, or maybe Travis Henry. I'm interested in what you think. All right, so I bit here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try it. And now, first of all, give me some grace here because this is a limited data pool that I can work from. It's only players that have been on the Bills. And so these aren't going to be perfect, but I did the best that I could. Here you go. My first one, Keon Coleman, the Bills' top pick. I compare him to Mike Williams. The Mike Williams that once played for Syracuse, then went to Tampa Bay. There was a couple of different Mike Williams along the way at the wide receiver position. He spent his first 4 seasons with Tampa Bay, then 1 season with the Bills, and then had a couple of injury things. He wound up signing a big deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then he was traded to the Bills and had some injuries with Buffalo, and his next stop, his career kind of came to an abrupt end after a pretty good start. And then, of course, he recently passed away. Very unfortunate. But I thought stylistically they made a lot of sense. Bigger-bodied guys that weren't necessarily burners, but one with body control and ball skills. And both actually were very good yards after catch players. And so I think Keon Coleman's a pretty unique player in the landscape of previous or current Buffalo Bills. And so had to really think outside the box to get that one, but I like Mike Williams as the comp there. For Cole Bishop, I'm going with Jordan Poyer. I think they win in similar ways. I think Bishop's more dynamic athletically than Jordan Poyer, but in terms of guys that are very good playing downhill, good man-to-man players against tight ends, good tacklers, good blitzers, right? That's the unique thing about Jordan Poyer, a very good blitzer. I think they stylistically win in similar ways. For Dwayne Carter, the defensive tackle out of Duke, my comparison there is Adolphus Washington. And I know that Adolphus Washington didn't have a great career with the Buffalo Bills as a day 2 selection, but I think they were similar coming out of college in that they were very good pass rushers, penetration style guys that maybe had some questions against the run. And then I think with Adolphus Washington, Rex Ryan had him playing like 5 tech, not really a great spot for him. I think he would have had a much better career if he got a chance to be a penetration style player as a 3 tech. For Ray Davis, I'm going to go with Travis Henry on this one. Both dense builds, short, stocky backs that win with power and have pass catching ability. I thought that made a lot of sense to me. For Cedric Van Pran Granger, the Bills' 5th round pick out of Georgia, the center, I'm going with Melvin Fowler. Melvin Fowler had a good career in the NFL, started for the Bills for a couple of seasons. Really similar builds, a little bit shorter, but stocky and like leaner, but have some power components to the way that they play, right? Both around 300 pounds. And I thought Melvin Fowler had a very quietly good career for himself. And I think they win in similar ways with technique and power. For a linebacker, Edifon Ulafosio, I'm going with Zach Brown. Both guys that have pretty good size, but are known for their athleticism, their range, their ability to play in space. Both very good tacklers. For Javon Solomon, the edge rusher out of Troy, I have IK Enem-Pali. IK didn't really have much of a career in the NFL, but he had a similar build, like short, like right around 6 foot, around 250 pounds, good length, pass rush specialist. I think that they have some similarities among themselves. For Tylen Grable, the offensive tackle out of UCF, I'll go with current Bills offensive tackle Ryan Vandemark. Tall, rangy frames, athletic, but also guys that just need some work. And I think Ryan Vandemark has grown tremendously throughout his time in the NFL. Hopefully that can happen with Tylen Grable. But guys that are more athletic than they are physical, guys with really good size and big-time athletes, I think that's where they can draw some parallels. And then also guys that I thought when I studied the college tape, in which I have done for Tylen Grable to this point, I thought both were kind of lacking gravitational pull, right? They don't latch very consistently and stay on blocks, but you can see the movement skills and the length, and there's a nice foundation to develop. For Daquan Hardy, I'm going with, he's also the slot corner out of Penn State. I'm going with Nickel Roby. And I will say that Daquan Hardy is bigger. Daquan Hardy's 2 inches taller, actually 2 3/8 inches taller, 10 pounds heavier, and has return ability. And so if I'm not mistaken, actually, Nickel Roby did some punt return as well. But guys that play above their weight class, physical, athletic, have ball skills, I thought that was a pretty good comparison. And then the last one is Travis Clayton, the rugby player. I can't even do that, right? I mean, Christian Wade, I guess, because neither have ever played football before. There's no comparison that I can give you for Travis Clayton. So there you go. Hopefully you enjoyed that. That was fun to kind of figure out. And if you have thoughts on that, fill up the YouTube comments. Let me know what you're thinking. If you have comparisons for the Bills draft class to, Bills players past or present, I'd love to hear from you on that. One bit of housekeeping that I need to address. I aimed to do this at the beginning of the podcast, but we're still in the beginning part, so I'll go ahead and do it now. A couple of weeks ago, actually, on our last Herd Mentality episode, we had our annual dad-daughter draft duel between Drew and his daughter Lexi, who's a 6th grader, where for 4 years now, they have both sent me a mock draft for the Bills, a 7-round mock draft for the Bills, and I pick which one I like the best. And going into this year, Drew, the father, had won twice, and Lexi had won one time. And so this was a big year because Drew was either going to go up 3-1 on the all-time series, or it was going to be evened up at 2-2. And of course, I didn't know whose mock was whose when I did this on the last episode of Herd Mentality. Well, I've heard back from Drew, and the results are in. I picked Lexi's draft. So the all-time series tied up at 2-2. And again, I had no idea whose was who's entering the podcast last week. So for those of you who caught that in their last Herd Mentality episode, Lexi's the winner, and it's tied up 2-2. The next one here comes from Matt. Matt says, would Zay Jones be the Bills wide receiver 4 over Mac Hollins? He's younger and has been more productive. What are your thoughts on pursuing him? So as many have asked me, and I'm sure you've realized at this point, Zay Jones has been released by the Jacksonville Jaguars. And these are the types of moves that happen after the draft. Of course, the Jaguars have Christian Kirk. They signed Gabe Davis. They drafted Brian Thomas in the 1st round. Well, now Zay Jones has been cut. These are the types of domino effects that happen with draft picks. And so Zay Jones hits the open market, as we know, a former 2nd-round pick by the Bills. The Bills traded up to get him, and was the 2nd draft pick ever under Sean McDermott, the first one being Tre'Davious White. So Zay Jones plays 2 seasons on the Bills, and then the Bills trade him away. And he had a very concerning end to his time in Buffalo, whether it was the off-the-field odd situation in the hotel room, I think in California, was a very strange situation. The effort issues on tape, right? There was a 3-interception game. Zay Jones got traded after a 3-interception game by Josh Allen. I think all of them were throws targeted to Zay Jones, where there was a couple where he didn't even compete for the football, and Josh Allen winds up throwing a pick. So there were some effort issues. He had some drops. It was like a rough end to his time in Buffalo. And then his mom even had some cryptic tweets about the Bills out there, posted a picture of Sammy Watkins in a Chiefs jersey and said, one man's trash is another man's treasure, like a couple of different things. It was just a very strange end. And so all this to say, sure, I'd be interested in Zay Jones. I think he'd be a worthwhile depth addition to this wide receiver core. He'd elevate the floor of the group for sure. But I also am mindful of all those dynamics that existed at the end of his time in Buffalo, and I wonder if, that bridge has been burned. Now, one thing that I will say is I feel like I'm a little higher on Mac Hollins than a lot of people. I feel like everyone's trying to replace Mac Hollins. I think he's going to be a very useful piece of this roster. Of course, a guy that can truly play the X receiver, big-time special teams impact, a lot of leadership. He's a big-time blocker. I think he gives you size and ball skills down the field. Like, I am not sleeping on Mac Hollins. I'm not sitting here telling you he's going to catch 40, 50 passes this year. But I think as your wide receiver 4, you can do a whole lot worse than Mac Hollins. But that said, I'd still be open to the Zay Jones idea, assuming that there's a path for it working and that, that there's not bad blood that's going to cause some type of rift or issue with the direction of this wide receiver core moving forward. All right, folks, plenty more to get to. A bunch of questions about Keon Coleman coming up on the other side of it, so be sure to stick with me. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You've already talked about that, but there's so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards, and the more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. You can get unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. There's always something fun and new to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, folks, let's get back into these outstanding questions. Next one comes from Alex. Alex has put me on the spot, and I respect it. I'm not afraid to answer your questions. If you guys want to come at me with some heat or challenge something that I've said in the past, I'm down. I'll be happy to do my best to answer it. So Alex says, we all know how you felt about Keon Coleman before the draft. Now that the dust has settled, after watching his various interviews and press conferences, hearing what Beane has said about him, and listening to other analysts talk about him, has your opinion on Coleman as a prospect changed at all from where it was pre-draft? Let me start by saying this. I'm not going to cling to my priors on Keon Coleman, right? You all know that I had a lot of concerns about his ability to separate. Now, I've also said that everything else about his skill set is really good. Size, body control, hands, ball skills, yards after catch. It's all very good. Physicality. But he doesn't create a lot of separation. And as I've said repeatedly, my number one trait for a wide receiver is separation skills. Now, I'm not going to cling to my priors and wish that Keon Coleman doesn't have great success for the Buffalo Bills. I'm a big Keon Coleman fan. He's the wide receiver that my favorite teams just drafted with their top pick when they needed a receiver. I'm all in on rooting for him to be awesome. I didn't like the Josh Allen pick. That didn't mean I was going to sit there forever and be disgruntled about the pick. I was clearly wrong about that. Just like I didn't like Cody Ford or Boogie Basham, but I still tried to find the positivity on those selections and root for them to have great success. I'm right there with Keon Coleman. No, it wasn't the pick that I would make, which our episode tomorrow is with Bruce Nolan, where I'm going to tell you the picks that I would make versus Brandon Beane, and Bruce Nolan's going to do the same. But I'm not going to sit here and cling to my priors and root for him to not be good so that my draft assessment can be right. So I do think that the last couple of days have been helpful. Obviously, getting to see the personality of Keon Coleman has mattered a lot to me, right? In the past, he was just number 4 on Florida State playing wide receiver. Right now, there's more to him now. I know more about his personality. He plays for the Bills and has a chance to have an outstanding relationship with Josh Allen. Now, as terms of me changing my views on him as a prospect, he hasn't done anything yet that shows me he can separate in the NFL, right? So there's that piece of it. I'm still concerned about that. But I certainly have a lot more optimism after learning more about him as a person, seeing how I think he's going to vibe with this team, seeing and hearing about the commitment level that I feel like he's going to have to becoming the best player that he can, being more open-minded to him, of course, because he is on the team, knowing how young he is. And, this is really the first time recently that he's focused solely on football, right? He spent basketball and football. Now he's just football all the way. And again, I think the Bills are totally aware of the player they drafted, and they have to have a good plan in place to unlock his potential in the NFL. Now, one thing that I draw a lot of optimism for in Keon Coleman and the separation skills is that he has everything necessary to be a good separator. It's just route running technique. How does he set up his route breaks? How does he get in and out of breaks? How efficient can he be with his footwork? Can he evolve in terms of his ability to force false steps from a corner and then attack blind spots? Can he read leverage a little bit better? Those are the things that I'm looking for him to evolve with. He's got all the athleticism in the world to be a really good route runner. It's not anything he's physically lacking. So it's about learning, getting the technique down, getting repetition down, getting on the same page with Josh Allen. So that's what I'm clinging to. I'm not clinging to my priors. I'm clinging to this opportunity and hoping for Keon Coleman to be one heck of a football player for the Buffalo Bills. Next one here comes from Lisa. Lisa says, I believe your biggest concern about Keon Coleman is his lack of separation as a route runner. Can you compare both Diggs and Gabe Davis as to how they were viewed on this when evaluated as prospects and how that evaluation was validated or not when they became pros? Do you expect Xavier Leggett or Xavier Worthy to be better pros in their skill sets? Thank you. So, yes, I would say that Gabe Davis coming out of UCF, route running was a major concern. The one thing you knew he could do was run those go routes and win down the field, right? That was what he was awesome at. At UCF, he would get on top of corners, separate vertically. They'd throw the 9 route, and he'd catch it all like over and over again. And I think that continued to be good in the NFL, but the rest of his route running was lacking, and that never got better. For Stefon Diggs, that was the thing that you knew about Stefon Diggs. There was plenty of concerns about him based on production, based on like modest size, modest athletic profile, but you watched him run routes and you knew he was a good route runner. And of course, at Maryland, he had injuries. He had a lot of instability at the quarterback position. And so he didn't really have a great opportunity to showcase himself, but he was a big time recruit and everybody knew he could run routes. And of course, he's one of the better route runners in the NFL. So I think that those pre-draft assessments on both players proved to be true at the next level. As for Xavier Leggett and Xavier Worthy, I think it's a really different conversation now that you know what team these players are on. And now it's incumbent on those teams to figure it out and make it work. And I think you can look at both of them, whether it's Xavier Worthy in Kansas City and the speed dynamic that he creates. And Patrick Mahomes is a big arm quarterback that throws the deep ball well. And, also Xavier Worthy, I've talked about, he's good with the ball in his hands as well. He's a player that commanded a lot of volume at Texas. And I think those quick perimeter screens that Kansas City runs is going to be great for Xavier Worthy. I think that's a good landing spot for him. If Xavier Worthy went to a different team, I might not have been as high on it, right? Like the landing spots matter so much. With Xavier Leggett, I'm greatly concerned about him going to Carolina. I was high on Xavier Leggett, and I think it's a great pick for Carolina. Like, don't get me wrong, but I'm very concerned about Bryce Young and his ability to unlock Xavier Leggett. Like, I just don't think very highly of Bryce Young. And so I'm concerned about Xavier Leggett going to Carolina, not because I don't think Carolina made a good pick. They did. I just don't believe in their quarterback. And so, the landing spots really do impact the way that I perceive a player, right? And you're scouting in a vacuum. You don't know what team they play for. You don't know what scheme, what opportunity exists. Now you do, right? So those conversations become a little bit different. Next one here comes from Harry, who says, I'm not sure how to summarize this into a herd mentality question, but I just can't join most of Bills Mafia and Bills media in being outraged by wide receiver or declaring this a lost season. We got younger and cheaper. We're going to champion 12 personnel and running the ball. We're clearly zigging with power and physicality when the rest of the league is still zagging with size and speed, small and speed. I'm sure you'll better articulate the reason to have optimism for this season ahead. Harry, I think this is a good point. And my first 2 episodes this week talking about Keon Coleman and then just the idea of how the draft impacts the direction of the Bills offense, all of that was very much designed to challenge this idea that this wide receiver core is a fatal flaw for the Bills in 2024. And I would, for anyone that missed those episodes, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to them because I don't find myself there. And what I keep coming back to about this Bills team is that we have to think differently about it. The Bills are going in a different direction. They've turned over so much of their defense. They've turned over so much of their defensive coaching staff. The only person in the same position last year to this year is Joe Dana, the safeties coach. Obviously, offensively, quite a bit of transition as well. Your top two receivers, really, for the last few years, Davis and Diggs, are gone. You've moved on from Mitch Morse. Like, this team, there's a lot of different stuff going on here. And we need to think differently about this team in every imaginable way. Because it's not just, okay, look at past iterations of the Bills under this regime and look at what they have right now and say, okay, this guy does what that guy used to do, and that guy can do what this guy used to do. That's not how we should be looking at this team. It's a new direction. I do think that they are going to lean into 12 personnel. I do think they are going to run the football. If I'm not mistaken, under Joe Brady down the stretch, they ran the ball like 58% of the time, and it was a winning formula. I think their backfield's better now with Ray Davis and Ty Johnson and James Cook going into his third season. They should run the ball. Or incorporating Joe Brady and putting his footprint and fingerprints on this offense and what it's going to be in the spread concepts. It's going to have a different look and feel. So you're not looking for another Gabe Davis or another Steph Diggs. You're looking for how you're going to evolve this team moving forward. And it's going to have a different look and feel. And for that, I'm pretty excited. That's where I draw optimism. I liked the previous iteration of the Bills. Very good football team, right? A lot of success. 4 straight division titles, win a playoff game at least one every single year. Only one other team can say they can do that. It's the Chiefs. But at the end of the day, that iteration was only good enough to lose to the Bengals or Chiefs in the playoffs. I'm excited to try something a little bit different and see if it can get a little bit further. All right, folks, we got a bunch more to get to, so be sure to stick with us. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, the next one here comes from Pierre. Pierre says, I found the draft results for the Bills a little funky this year with 10 draftees across 9 positions. Brandon Beane usually likes to double dip to address identified needs, but he did none of that this year. Any thoughts on this approach? Well, the first thing I'll say here, and it's a good question, Pierre, I would say that I don't think that this was intentional. I'd be surprised if Brandon Beane said, you know what, I want to pick 10 players at 9 different positions. But I do think that it speaks to how this roster is resetting and that you wanted to add across the board. Get a piece for every position group that gives you some sort of opportunity to add to every spot on the roster. But also that the roster is not like in shambles. That's the one thing that I find there to be a disconnect with. It's not like this team is devoid of talent. It just looks different. And so it makes sense to me. Just keep adding. I would have probably double dipped at wide receiver. I'll admit that. But I don't know that it was intentional, to be honest with you. And I think amid the reset, you can see some logic behind, okay, just add at every position and see how it can take on a new direction at every spot. Josh says, does Ray Davis have the pass pro ability we need in our running back room? So I went back and watched some Ray Davis this week with very much the intent of learning more about his pass protection skills. I would say that I see some good and some bad. The good part is that I think he does well to scan, diagnose, and put himself in positions to help where it's needed. I think he's got to become better with his technique as a blocker. Right now, he likes to just kind of throw his shoulder into the rushers, and that's not going to work, right? That's the type of technique that's going to get you beat in the NFL. So I think what he has to develop is his ability to square up, leverage his hips, and fit his hands and play with his hands and not just throw shoulders at guys. So I like the diagnostic skills. We got to work on the technique of how we block. But I think that's all teachable. He's certainly got the frame and size that suggests he can be very good at pass protection. And I like that it appears that he has the mental piece of it down. Josh had a second part to his question. He said, looking at Greg Rousseau signing his 5th-year option, are we looking at another Tremaine Edmonds situation or more Ed Oliver and buying time to work out extension details? At this point in the process, I think it's more Ed Oliver. The difference here is Tremaine Edmunds played on the 5th-year option. And so that we can have that conversation if we get there. But Greg Rousseau would have to play this year and next before it parallels the Tremaine Edmunds situation. If he plays this year and then signs an extension after this season, it's going to parallel more the Ed Oliver situation. But I do think it's a good idea, probably from both parties, to play out this season before attacking an extension. I'm sure Greg Rousseau wants to go out there and put up some big numbers and get that money as high as he can. And I'm sure the Bills would like to see if he can do that. So that's where I'm at on that situation. Eric says, I wanted to ask you about Diggs' effect on the offense. While we know his production dipped massively down the stretch, I wonder if you got a chance to see his gravity on film, if he opened things up for others like Kincaid and Shakir. I remember Snead saying something like they didn't double him, but he's the top corner, so they wouldn't need to. Do you think Diggs' gravity on the offense is underestimated? Side note, I heard he was taking himself out of more plays than usual, and that may be why his snap count dropped as well. Part of me thinks he may have quietly quit on the team, including several uncharacteristic drops. I'm glad they traded him for several reasons and have zero regrets. I just wonder if the Bills will miss the gravity he may provide, thus opening things up for others. I do think Coleman could bring some of that as well. It's a good question. I don't think that you saw teams truly double Stefon Diggs, where you legitimately have 2 players committed to guarding him. I think that you will see and have seen teams leverage their coverage towards Diggs, right? Shade a safety, move their overhang defender out a little bit further. I think those are the types of ways that Diggs commanded attention from defenses. Now, some teams, like the Chiefs, didn't have to. L'Jarius Sneed just ate his lunch all game long, and he didn't make any plays and took him off the menu. But I think when it did happen, it was just more shading coverage more than truly double covering him, if that makes sense. Now, as for how that helped or hurt guys like Shakir and Kincaid, I actually think Stefon Diggs' presence took away from Kincaid. There were so many times on tape where I felt like the ball could go to Kincaid and it was forced to Diggs instead. And so I'm excited for that. I think for Shakir, he's always probably going to be more of an inside player in the slot. And Diggs doesn't really take away much from there. There's a lot of just winning one-on-one and finding leverage in the slot. So I don't diminish that there was some attention placed on Diggs, but I don't think it's to the point where we say the only reason Kincaid or Shakir was able to break out like they did was because of Diggs. And in fact, as that went along throughout the course of the season and became less and less efficient, you saw less and less of that shading coverage towards Stefon Diggs. And I think I keep going back to this quote from Sean McDermott in his pre-draft press conference where he said, there's power in sharing the ball. And I really hope that with the new makeup of this skill group around Josh Allen and the spread dynamics that Joe Brady's going to incorporate, that Josh Allen finds a level of freedom in executing this offense that he hasn't had before, because he's not worried about funneling 150 targets to Stefon Diggs. Now, ideally, you'd love to have a player that commands and deserves 150 targets. But I hope that Josh can just play ball. And you hear him talking about how he's working on progressions and where to start his eyes, and Joe Brady really reworking a lot of things, and he's surprised that he hasn't always done it that way. That gets me excited. That's some of my gripes that I've had about Josh is I'm like, why are our eyes here? And if you're in our Discord channel and you were part of our all 22 reviews, talk about this all the time. It's like the leverage of these route combinations is here. Why are we looking here? So I'm excited to see all that play out. And I hope that this inspires Josh to just do the smart, right thing with the football, like all the time. And or at least I'm finding myself optimistically searching for reasons to believe that will be true. And maybe there is a benefit to not having Stefon Diggs. And I mean, if Stefon Diggs is going to be like he was the last 12 games of the season, that guy didn't help the team at all anyways. Josh Allen with a sub 75 passer rating, throwing him the ball. Shakir outproducing him on 50 less targets. Come on now. Like, he wasn't a positive asset to this team down the stretch. Now, I'm not diminishing what he's done every minute of his time in Buffalo before that. But he wasn't helping this team down the stretch last year. But he was still getting targets. But he just wasn't producing on them. So I'm excited to see what this looks like moving forward. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. Tomorrow, Joe and Bruce versus Brandon Beane. Round, 5 or 6. We've been doing this every year for a while. Looking forward to it. Don't miss it. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.